Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
Let's get to the news. With 16 days left to vote, here are some of the headlines the president is getting. The Daily Beast. Trump is taking down names as Republicans begin jumping ship on his, quote, totally off-the-rails campaign. Axios. Trump's advisors brace for loss, point fingers. The New York Times reports that aides are quietly conceding just how dire Trump's political predicament appears to be. The Washington Post reports that the mood inside the Trump administration has been, quote, grim. CNN reports that former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly has told friends that Trump is, quote, the most flawed person he's ever known. And here is some leaked audio of Republican Senator Ben Sasse talking about Trump on a phone call with his constituents.
The way he kisses dictators' butts. I mean, the way he ignores that the Uyghurs are in literal concentration camps in Xinjiang right now. He hasn't lifted a finger on behalf of the Hong Kongers. I mean, he and I have a very different foreign policy. It isn't just that he fails to lead our allies, it's that the United States now regularly sells out our allies under his leadership. The way he treats women and spends like a drunken sailor, the ways I criticize President Obama for that kind of spending, I've criticized President Trump for as well. He mocks evangelicals behind closed doors. His family has treated the presidency like a business opportunity. He's flirted with white supremacists. I don't think the way he's led through COVID has been reasonable or responsible. I'm worried that if President Trump loses, as looks likely, that he's going to take the Senate down with him. I'm now looking at the possibility of a Republican bloodbath in the Senate, and that's why I've never been on the Trump train. The debate is not going to be, Ben Sasse, why were you so mean to Donald Trump? It's going to be, what the heck were any of us thinking that selling a TV-obsessed, narcissistic individual to the American people was a good idea? It is not a good idea.
That was Ben Sasse talking about the candidate he's going to vote for president, Donald Trump. So before we get to the shit show of Trump's campaign right now, Tommy, do you have a reaction to our two most recent Republican profiles in courage, Ben Sasse and John Kelly?
So frustrating. I mean, look, I guess better late than never. It's not the worst thing to have Ben Sasse say all of this in October before the election. But man, that wasn't a list of news stories. Ben Sasse could have been speaking out about the Uyghurs in concentration camps for years. But, we'll set that aside. I hate these stories for so many reasons. We read all the same stuff in 2016 about how Trump was angling to buy a TV network and the staff knew they were going to lose. And so, here we are again. No one should be celebrating on the 1 yard line. John Kelly, let's just pause there. The most flawed person you've ever known. Okay, that's great. That's lovely. No one said you had to work for him. No one said you had to rip kids away from their families at the border. You chose to take that job. There's no honor in that kind of service. Here's an idea for something you could do. A bunch of newspapers reported that Trump questioned whether the service made by members of the U.S. military was worth it while standing next to you at your own son's grave. If you think he's the worst person on the planet, why don't you speak up about whether that's true or not? You're the only one who knows for sure, and you can clarify. So again, I guess there's some political benefit to us for having this stuff out there. I'm also grateful to the lower level staffers who joined Republican voters against Trump and are making these on the record, sustained, potentially career ending efforts to defeat him. But God, I'm so sick of these leaked or half-assed comments, right? Or John Kelly or Jim Mattis who say, well, we don't want to get involved in politics. Well, when you decided to take off the uniform and be Secretary of Defense or the White House Chief of Staff, the most political job in all of the U.S. government, you cross that line, right? So you don't get to duck these questions now. It drives me nuts.
Lovett, what do you think? And do you find either of these comments useful in some way?
Well, sure, it's useful. It's all useful. Ben Sasse was quite muted when he thought he might face a primary, and he thought he might want some of those Trump voters. So no profile in courage there. Yeah, I would divide Republicans who have spoken out against Trump into two categories, for the country and for the record. For the country are people who have taken great personal risks to speak out. They have filmed ads. They have endorsed Joe Biden. They have been honest. They've put their faces on camera. They've done it repeatedly. They've done it because they believe it's what's in the best interest of the country. I have no doubt that Ben Sasse believes what he says in that audio. I don't think he is just doing it because he's trying to earn plaudits. But I do think he and John Kelly are in some sense saying it for the record. When we look back on this moment, they are on the record having issued these criticisms. But Mattis, Kelly, this is America in 2020. Put your fucking faces on camera. That's what matters. It matters. It matters when you say it to an Atlantic reporter so that it spreads around DC, or say it on a background call, or say it to friends, or say it to Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, and then go hide from people trying to confirm it. It matters. It matters. So, I appreciate the people doing it for the country. I'm glad when people do it for the record, because I do think it's of some use to have Trump tweeting at a serious conservative and lambasting Ben Sasse on Twitter. I don't think that should be his message. It's a good distraction for us, but we shouldn't be. We should appreciate that distinction.
Yeah. My view is I don't really give a shit about Ben Sasse, what he has to say, who he really is. Like, my mind in the last 16 days is just like pure political animal, what's going to help us win. And as soon as I had read this story about Sasse and I knew it was leaked, but I didn't know someone had the full audio that they were playing until I was prepping for the pod. I'm like, why isn't that in an ad yet? That should be on air. And I want Ben Sasse's comments in front of Republican and Republican-leaning independent voters, because you look at some of these stories about undecided voters right now. I know they exist; they're out there, and they all say the same thing. They sort of like either Donald Trump's policies or think that as president he hasn't done that bad of a job, but they hate him. They're disgusted by him, right? And I do think that playing like Ben Sasse's comments for some of these voters may give them the permission structure to say, oh, here's a Republican who may agree with me on a lot of policies, but he hates Donald Trump too, so maybe I can jump ship. He's obviously a coward. Everything you said is right, Lovett. Like he's a complete coward. But I'm just saying, like, let's get this stuff in an ad.
For sure. And I'm in the same boat. Obviously, all I care about is what helps us win. Of course. But like when it comes to Ben Sasse, I do find it just a little bit interesting about what's going to happen to Republicanism in the long haul, because Ben Sasse is a good example of someone who like had a reputation of being serious, of being more intellectually honest than most, of having genuinely insightful things to say that were conservative, but like worthy of discussion. And what the lesson of Trump is, you can't be halfway to Trump and walk away with your dignity. You just can't, because he has spent all of that capital these past 4 years and emerges a shell of the kind of politician he thought he would be.
Let's talk about who's blaming who within the Trump campaign. The Washington Post reports that staffers and advisors are trying to decide whether a potential loss, quote, should be attributed to an undisciplined message, the coronavirus pandemic, or campaign spending and choices made by former campaign manager Brad Parscale. What do you think, Tommy? Who's at fault here?
I mean, I can't believe that reporters put this stuff in print. Like, yes, Brad Parscale burned through a ton of money too quickly. They raised and spent $1 billion, and that means that Trump hasn't been running ads in places like Iowa since July. And now that the race is competitive, he had to visit there last week. They had to go back up on air. There's a competitive Senate race. It's a mess. But Trump hired Brad Parscale, right? And so, yes, like flying to California a couple weeks before the election, really bad. But the fault for winning or losing relies with Trump and Trump alone. There's no amount of campaign ads or strategy decisions that can make up for their disastrous handling of the coronavirus. And as we were recording, someone sent me a tweet from Donald Trump where he's again criticizing Dr. Fauci for making bad decisions about masks. And then he ends it with, also, bad arm. Trump is making fun of Dr. Fauci for throwing out the first pitch of that baseball game and doing it badly right now. This happened like as of a minute ago. So look, that's the problem. Like that's the reason they're losing. Like not because of Brad Parscale. He certainly didn't help. But the real problem is mocking Fauci on an all-staff call, as he also did today, empowering people like Scott Atlas that are basically like pandemic truthers and doing a disastrous job. Right? Like that's your problem.
I mean, in fairness to Trump, of course he's making fun of Fauci's arm. Fauci's going to use that arm to vote for Joe Biden. And like that's something to keep in mind.
I just love that like everyone's like, let's go through the spreadsheets to see where Brad spent too much money or something like that. Meanwhile, we're looking at headlines like you said about the Fauci thing, which has gotten really out of control in the last 24, 48 hours. On a call with reporters today, Trump said Dr. Fauci is a, quote, disaster who is a, quote, bomb every time he's on TV. He called other health officials idiots. He said Americans don't care about the pandemic anymore and just think whatever. And then last night, there's an NBC News headline: Trump mocks Biden for trusting scientists about COVID, warns that he'll listen to the scientists if elected, which Joe Biden just like used as an endorsement. Like,
Bizarre.
there's Donald Trump. Donald Trump's out there being like, don't you elect Joe Biden? He's going to listen to the scientists if you do. Like, yeah, no shit.
We really are in this sort of like, decadent decline, last days of court. Trump is like, what's the guy whispering in Trump's ear is this crank radiologist named Scott Atlas. It's the only person feeding him the kind of information he wants. The consensus is obviously where we all know it is on masks and testing and all the rest.
The bigger problem is the cases are exploding right now. Like, we are back up to really serious, scary numbers of new coronavirus cases. And everyone is predicting that it's going to get worse as it gets colder. And Trump is attacking Dr. Fauci in campaign calls.
And right now, one of the holdups on stimulus is the fact that the White House is refusing to go along with expanded testing. Why? Because Trump doesn't want to do it, and Scott Atlas is telling him it's a bad idea to test people and find out if they're asymptomatic so they can't spread it to other people.
We were just talking about that. Like, there's two things. I would love Joe Biden to bring up both of these at the debate. Two like pretty easy to understand points. There was that story that the Trump administration was going to mail masks to every single American, and then Trump didn't want them to because he didn't believe in masks. And then the point you just made, Lovett, that now we know that there was a plan to do more expanded testing, and Scott Atlas and Donald Trump were just like, no, we don't want to do more testing. So they didn't want to hand out masks, and they didn't want to do more testing. Like, pretty easy to understand how badly he fucked up the pandemic. Now, he did, in a sign of how the money issues for the campaign might be problematic, Trump did spend Sunday with, 17 days to the election here in Orange County, here in California, down in Orange County, raising money because his campaign has about half the cash on hand that Biden does. And that's because of pretty weak fundraising and the crazy spending. Tommy, how real and problematic do you think the Trump campaign's money issues are in the home stretch?
So I don't think any amount of paid advertising is going to really overwhelm the broader news cycle. But there are key states where Trump is getting outspent by Biden and his allies. So the Times had a big piece on spending over the weekend. And if you look at states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Biden is basically has a 2-to-1 advantage in those states. And Biden's also spending in places like Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska. They're spending a little in Georgia. They even went up with a $6 million buy in Texas. So it has allowed Biden to spread the field. It gives him a lot more paths to 270. It also, I think, yes, the value of ads can be overstated, but I think when you are on the air in a market and your opponent is not, or is on the air half as much as you are, that actually can move the needle. So I doubt any of this is determinative, but clearly it's built awareness of who Biden is, his plans, his record. It's helped his favorables go up. Hopefully it can help drown out some of this last minute crap. But yeah, a candidate coming off the campaign trail to fly to California on October 18th or whatever it was yesterday, that is an absolute failure of strategy, an utter failure.
Yeah. So we obviously love a good Trump and disarray story, but in each of these pieces, there are also Trump officials saying that they still see multiple paths to victory, even if they are narrow. This morning, Trump campaign manager Bill Stepien told reporters, quote, he feels better about our pathway to victory than we have at any point in the campaign. And it's not just the Trump campaign saying that. Over the weekend, several outlets published excerpts from a memo written by Biden campaign manager Jen O'Malley Dillon, where she wrote the following: the reality is that this is a far closer race than some of the punditry we're seeing on Twitter and on TV would suggest. In the key battleground states where this election will be decided, we remain neck and neck with Donald Trump. Yikes. Lovett, first, the Trump campaign still sees a few net paths to a narrow electoral victory. What are they?
They are looking at paths where they think if they can win Florida, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, they don't need Michigan, and they can win maybe one vote in Maine, right? There's a bunch of different paths where they don't think they need Florida to win. If they have Florida, things get very easy for them, right? They can win Florida, they can win North Carolina, they don't need Pennsylvania, they don't need Michigan, but they need Arizona. They're looking at paths where if they lose Florida and they lose Michigan, they can still win with a vote in Maine, Wisconsin, Arizona, but then they need Nevada, right? There's a few different routes for them. Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that is striking about it is if you just go and sort of look at the map, right? Like you move Florida and Pennsylvania over, right? You can imagine them going together, and then all of a sudden, it's 2016 and our stomachs are in a knot, and we're panicked, and we need to win everything that's left, right? Like the lesson of 2016 is like every state doesn't run elections independently; they will move together. And we don't know exactly what surprises there will be on election night, but there will be surprises. Like there will be surprises.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Now, you have to take all this with a grain of salt, of course, because, campaigns that are behind lie and make it sound like things are better than they are. I thought what was interesting, sort of digging into what Stephen's different paths there, is that they don't feel very good about Wisconsin. Almost all of their paths to victory have them losing Wisconsin. So they don't feel great about that. They do feel very good about Florida. They think that Florida is easy. At least that's what they say. And then it seems like Pennsylvania, Arizona, and maybe Michigan and Nevada are all four states where they feel like the race is tight, but they might be able to pull it out. And then, of course, I should say he, at least in that story, said he felt good about North Carolina, but there's an ABC News story this morning that said Trump officials are suddenly not feeling good about North Carolina, but who the fuck knows? Tommy, what advantages does the Trump campaign still have right now? Like, what are some of the reasons they think they can still pull this off?
Trump still dominates the news cycle like no one we've ever really seen. It has been quite the net negative for him lately, but that still is a lot of power. And it worries me. His ability to get the press to report on basically anything he wants is a huge advantage. We don't really know the impact of potential of voter suppression or how voter tendencies might have changed because of the pandemic. We can't really understand, I don't think, how much all this disinformation and these conspiracy theories that are flying around is impacting voters. Like, I'm not suggesting there's some big foreign intel operation, but you are seeing sort of QAnon or QAnon adjacent stuff coming up anecdotally. It's reaching millions of people on Facebook. I don't think we really know how that cuts. We know that Republican voter registration has increased in some states. Maybe there's this big surge of like white men who are going to vote that we're not seeing in polls right now. We know that Trump is pretending the pandemic's not happening and doing big rallies and having his field team do in-person canvassing. Maybe that will pay dividends. Maybe undecideds will break to him. Maybe the polling is off, right? So like those are all the major caveats we see out there. I do think like the thing people need to know is like 90% of Trump's paths to victory involve him winning Florida. So that's a big piece of this for them. And for Biden, his easiest path is basically win the Hillary states, win Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and he's at 278 electoral votes, and this thing is over. So there's just a lot more optionality for Biden now.
I would just add two things to the list that Tommy just mentioned. We talked about spending. Sheldon Adelson just decided to dump $75 million into the race. And two, Fox News is an in-kind contribution every single night for 3 hours a night, worth billions of dollars in free advertising. They're pushing out, the latest sort of shit from Giuliani. They will be helping him all the way down the home stretch. And it's actually, I think, something that was also true in 2016 that maybe we're forgetting, which is there was a Hillary advantage in the closing days of that race too, but Trump was able to overcome it because of the kind of shadow campaign other organizations were running around the kind of chaotic, floundering operation that he was running, and we're seeing the same thing now.
Yeah, I think the fear from the beginning has been that the Trump campaign would register a whole bunch of non-college educated white voters, specifically, as you noted, Tommy, men, in some of these swing states that are Trumpy kind of voters but didn't vote in 2016. So and look, in some of the registration data, we see that they succeeded in registering some number of new Republicans. And then the other scary thing is there's a pool of registered non-college educated white voters who just simply sat out in 2016 and 2018, but have been registered to vote, and that they would turn out those, and they do have this very big ground game. And, I think Priorities USA, like a month ago, they did a presentation, that's the big Democratic super PAC, and they said, if you just increased, sort of white working class turnout in some of these swing states by 4%, and you decreased turnout among voters of color by 4% in some of these swing states, suddenly it's a razor's edge race, and Trump could easily win it. And I think that's what they're looking at. I mean, Tommy, do you think Jen's warning about the race being close is what the Biden campaign is seeing in their polling, or do you think she wrote that memo to avoid complacency?
I know for a fact that it was part messaging, and they are warning against complacency, and I think that is smart. But there's some reality to it, right? Like there have been polls that have Biden up like 8 points in North Carolina. The Biden campaign does not think that those are real. They think Biden is closer to like 1 or 2 points up in North Carolina. There was a poll, a Quinnipiac poll, a good poll, that had Biden up 11 points in Florida. The Biden campaign thinks that is nonsense. The race is like 3 or 4 points. So their message is take nothing for granted, keep donating, keep volunteering, like run through the tape. But we all have to remember that we've never voted in a pandemic before, one, and margins of error exist for a reason. And so if it's a plus or minus 4% margin of error, that margin applies to both numbers, right? So you could see an 8-point swing in a poll with a plus or minus 4 MOE. And that's just something to remember. Like polls are not determinative. They're snapshots in time. They're imperfect. The averages that 538 and all these sites are doing is better. But again, like we've never voted in a pandemic. We just don't know. So we got to work hard.
I mean, if I told you boys that there was a 1 in 10 shot, I put a bomb in your car, you'd be fucking terrified to start.
That's right.
Unless I was Donald Trump, and then I'd say it's fake news. There's no bomb. It's fine. No, you don't need to worry
send
about
Eric
bombs.
to start it. He just sent Eric to start it.
No, I mean, I get. Look, Jen said the race isn't up double digits. They don't have it like that. If you look at the state polls right now, they sort of add up to a 7 or 8 point national lead, not quite the 10, 11 point lead that you see in some of the averages. So, it could be all that could be what she means by that. But it's close in a lot of these swing states. And partly it's close because, again, as I was just saying, like we don't know what the turnout's going to be. That polls are only as accurate as the type of electorate that ends up turning out. And that is just as much art as it is science sometimes, figuring that out. So, and the other worry I have is like rejected ballots, right? All these people are voting by mail. And by all these people, I mean mostly Democrats, right? The disparity between Democrats voting by mail and Republicans voting in person is huge. And so if there are a bunch of rejected ballots, it's going to hurt Democrats more. So that is the other X factor here that's sort of unnerving.
One other just, things that are happening that you might not think about, right? Well, when the electorate shifts redder as we get closer and closer to Election Day, the kind of shit Trump's pulling that's designed to motivate his base will matter more for them than it would in the opposite for us, right? Like if they're going to be pushing misinformation for the next 2 weeks really, really hard to build up to Election Day, like that could work. That could manifest in a bunch of Trump people showing up who aren't telling pollsters right now that they're planning to vote.
Or a bunch of people who might be voting for Joe Biden deciding to stay home because they're so turned off by both candidates, which is the other thing that I really worry about. So any of the Trump campaign's paths to victory require destroying Joe Biden's very favorable image with voters. And now that Sleepy Joe, Senile Joe, Antifa Joe, all that hasn't worked. They're back to where they started, which is Joe Biden, criminal mastermind. You will all recall that Donald Trump was impeached because he extorted the Ukrainian government to launch a sham investigation into Joe Biden and his family. Well, last week, Rudy Giuliani and federally indicted Steve Bannon gave Rupert Murdoch's New York Post a bunch of emails they say they got from a Trump-loving computer repair shop owner in Delaware who says he took them off a laptop that Hunter Biden brought in for repair in April of 2019. The repair shop owner also reportedly gave the laptop to the FBI, which is reportedly investigating whether the emails are linked to a foreign intelligence operation, which might make sense because Rudy has been known to work with at least one Russian agent to dig up dirt on the Bidens.
Can we just just please note, because it's my favorite part of the story, that the repair shop owner who apparently ID'd Hunter Biden said on the record that he's legally blind.
Oh,
so just let me know how that identification was made. There's something else about a sticker, but again, okay. Worth noting.
I want to get to why like all of this seems suspect, but Lovett, what are the various allegations that Bannon and Rudy are trying to push here based on the content of this laptop? And again, just a warning for everyone, we have to go down, every once in a while we have to do this. We have to go deep down a rabbit hole of Fox News universe here and right-wing universe to really unpack all of this.
I mean, look, one of the key allegations from this weekend is that Joe Biden is a supportive father who loves his son even as he's struggling to overcome addiction. Like, that's one of the hardest hitting pieces of this.
That's one of the big ones.
Look, like, it's actually hard to say exactly what they're alleging. Was there some money exchange, some corrupt deal between Burisma and Hunter and Joe Biden? Like, it's very similar to Benghazi, in the sense that the core facts are quite well known, and they have been investigated. Right, Joe Biden has been found to have had no wrongdoing by 2 Republican investigations in Congress, and the most important facts, like the key. The key part of this story, the part that they have to lie to make it sound like there's corruption, is Hunter Biden was paid by a company in Ukraine. Joe Biden, as vice president, did the opposite of influence peddling. He did the opposite of what that company wanted. He did what was right, what the U.S. government wanted, and it hurt that company. It's the opposite of Hunter's influence having any effect, right? That's the facts, right? Burisma would have wanted something to happen. Joe Biden said, no, we're doing the opposite of that. That's it. And everything else is an effort to find some kind of something that sounds bad, that looks bad, that sounds like what corruption should be, that sound like what influence peddling is. But they don't have that, so they spread these misbegotten emails and what have you to try to create some sort of illusion of malfeasance.
Tommy, what are some of the many reasons the entire story is almost certainly bullshit?
Well, I mean, like, to Lovett's point, I mean, the underlying allegations that somehow Joe Biden used his position in the government to help Burisma and help his son has been thoroughly investigated by Republican-led congressional committees and found to be untrue. The latest kind of twist of the knife here is a suggestion based on a wild interpretation of an email that maybe Joe Biden himself got money or a kickback or some sort from one of these deals. But the problem with that is that Joe Biden has released like a decade, many more maybe, worth of tax returns. So if Joe Biden got some big influx of money from Burisma, it would show up in those tax returns, or he has committed massive tax fraud, right? So there's just a million parts of this underlying allegation that seem completely false. Now, some of the people who want to make this bad for Biden are trying to get into a game of like, are these emails real or not? And the Biden campaign doesn't want to go down that path because all of a sudden you have to confirm or deny everything Rudy Giuliani says. And I think that's nutty. But like, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical of all of this reporting. Yeah,
the supposed bombshell in the New York Post story is that maybe Hunter introduced Joe Biden at one point to one of his someone he was working with at this Ukrainian company. That's it. Like, and then the Biden people were
and
like,
the Biden campaign denied that.
Yeah, they're like, well, that's not on the official, the vice president's official schedule, so it wouldn't have been any kind of serious meeting. And they're like, well, could he have possibly just said hi to him once? And they're like, well, we don't know. He's met so. But even if that's true, so Joe Biden says hi to a Ukrainian executive in the worst case, right? Like, well,
that's why you have to come back to there's going to be a lot of noise. They rely on the fact that things that are investigation shaped are covered like investigations. Like the core allegation is false, right?
Yeah.
Burisma would have wanted Joe Biden to do thing X. Joe Biden did opposite of thing X. That is the core of it. So there's what he said passes him by in a hallway, whatever kind of shit that gets turned up about this. We know what happened at the time. They're public. It's public information.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a few other things too. Tommy mentioned the Republican-led Senate committees that couldn't find anything, even though Ron Johnson, dipshit from Wisconsin, admitted that the investigations were purely political to hurt Joe Biden in the election, and they still couldn't find anything. Rudy Giuliani admitted he went to the New York Post, admitted this because he didn't think any other outlet would take it, or if they did, they might fact-check it. Multiple other outlets reported that the New York Post reporter who wrote the story refused to put his byline on it because he didn't think it was credible, and this morning we learned that Fox News passed on the story because they didn't think it was credible, though it didn't stop all of their fucking opinion journalists in the primetime lineup from talking about it nonstop for the last week. But the news section of Fox said, no, this story's too crazy for us.
Yeah. Rupert Murdoch basically decided that he wanted to make this a thing, and so he did. The lead author on the story has no other stories written for the New York Post, and until recently was a producer for Sean Hannity. And her Instagram apparently is just full of pictures of her with MAGA people. So, that's kind of the level of sophistication we're dealing with, a lot of credibility.
I mean, let's talk about how the media has handled this in general. Twitter initially banned all links to the New York Post story, saying it violates their rules about distributing private personal information and their rules against distributing hacked material. They then backtracked to say they'll only remove such content if it's distributed directly by hackers or their accomplices. Facebook said it reduced the visibility of the story until it could be fact-checked. No non-MAGA news outlet could confirm any of the story. Most of them reported it rather skeptically, although a CBS reporter who asked Biden about the New York Post story got a fairly annoyed response from the former vice president. Lovett, how do you think the press and social media platforms have handled this?
I was surprised by what Twitter did. I just was genuinely surprised by it. It's a strange thing. They really don't. I mean, I think is a problem for 2 weeks and 4 days from now. But there is no coherence at all to Facebook or Twitter's decision making around what it considers misinformation and what it doesn't. I get that it's a really hard question, but banning it and then unbanning it and basically giving the right wing this talking point that they're being kind of manhandled by Twitter, I think is a strange thing to do. I think what I saw is a mix of people kind of trying to figure out how to cover this appropriately, right? I think that there's, there is obviously an important story here. I think the question is, what do you think that story is? Is it the story of is it the story that Rudy Giuliani is trying to say, or is it the story about why Rudy Giuliani is doing this and how he's doing it? And as part of that, an examination of what this material is. To me, that should be the core of this story. What is the chain of custody of this information? Why is Rudy Giuliani doing this? Who is he partnered with? What does it tell us about the way right-wing misinformation and disinformation and Russian intelligence operations really work? What does it say when you have Trump's handpicked intelligence chief on television doing his dirty work as if he's a member of the campaign, right? There's that, to me, is the bigger story than whatever they're trying to pump out of the New York Post.
Tommy, how do you, having been a press communication staffer on a lot of campaigns, there's always a balance when stories like these come out where you want to knock them down, but then you also don't want to give them too much oxygen because then everyone's talking about it. How do you think the Biden campaign should handle this?
I mean, I think at a staff level, they're doing the right thing. They can't get into this game where every piece of misinformation or everything that Rudy Giuliani says gets thrown to them to confirm or deny, right? You see a lot of people on Twitter right now saying, Democrats are suggesting that this is Russian disinformation, but the campaign refuses to confirm or deny whether these emails are real. I just don't think that's a fair standard. You can't say that Rudy Giuliani can work with some Ukrainian goober who's been sanctioned by the Trump administration and called a Russian asset, and then leave it to the Biden people to figure out what to do with that. I think the debate is a different story, right? Because associated with the substantive critique of Hunter Biden and Burisma, and we just talked through all the ways that is garbage, there is a real human element here, which is the New York Post releasing private, personal information, not about a candidate, but about his son and about his grandkids. And so it's just so gross to see text messages from a father to his son who is struggling with addiction get splashed out for all the world to see. It is so gross to see text messages from Hunter Biden to his daughter treated like there should be public information because it somehow makes the rest of this garbage the New York Post is peddling more credible. So I would want Biden to sort of focus on that human element and how gross it was and sort of repeat what he said at the debate, which is my son struggled with addiction. He's in recovery. I love him. I respect him for it. What Rudy Giuliani and your surrogates are saying is disgusting. It's offensive to anyone who has someone in their life with a substance abuse problem. And I'm not going to make this about families, but I can tell you what I will do as president is I'm not going to use the office that I hold to steer taxpayer dollars into the family business the way you have. I'm not going to install an incompetent schmuck like Jared Kushner in my White House because he's my son-in-law and then put him in charge of the pandemic response. I'd want to go a little bit on offense with this, but in a way that is not fully down in the dirt.
I would say your children have used the presidency as a business opportunity, and those aren't my words. That's what Republican Senator Ben Sasse said on a call last week.
Yeah.
I would put it in Ben Sasse's mouth. I agree Biden should go on offense. I find myself just really sad like having to read some of those texts and feeling really bad for Hunter and the family and the grandkids and everyone who've gone through a family member having addiction. And like, it's not only morally repugnant, by the way, like, I don't think that fucking works. How many families in this country have struggled with a family member who's had an addiction issue? Like millions and millions, not just Democrats, Trump voters, right? Like that cuts across all demographics, all party lines. Like going out there and gleefully mocking a family's addiction, I just don't think it's a great political play.
Well, it's also, in those messages, you see, like, I saw, like, Eric Trump and Don Jr. sort of gleefully tweeting this, right? And all we have seen, if they're true, are signs of a good father showing an incredible amount of love for his family. That's what they managed to reveal, to try to kind of to smear the Biden family. And it is a testament to just how low this operation, that these people cannot see that this is not an attack. It's not bad for Joe Biden. It's just a human story. And they're so inside of this evil Trump orbit, it has broken them. And they think that this is appropriate. That's all.
All right. We have time for a few questions.
Questions.
Stacey Smith Clayman via Facebook asks, talk about Texas and our early voting turnout so far. What does it mean? We can back up and talk about early voting, reading early voting tea leaves in general. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
It's exciting. Don't do it. Like, I'm glad to see the turnout. It's really exciting to see people showing up. If we waited 4 years for this moment, let it motivate you. Let it excite you. Let it inspire you. Don't take any aspect of it for granted whatsoever.
Why is reading the tea leaves on early voting turnout not the most accurate way to find out whether we're ahead or not?
Well, first of all, this is true in any election. We know based on polling that because of the asymmetric information around the pandemic and voting itself, people who are voting for Biden are tending to vote earlier by mail, and people who are going to vote for Trump are planning to do it in person. It's a huge, huge disparity. So even in a normal year, you can't read a lot into it. But now, all it tells us is that Democrats are voting, but we would know that anyway.
Yeah, the other issue, too, is you can't really determine who's ahead by party registration when one of the reasons that Biden has had a big polling lead, if the polling lead is true, is that he is pulling a lot of Republicans and independents, especially independents, in addition to just Democrats. So if you just see early voting that's like D this number, R this number, independent or no party this number, it's really hard to find out who's ahead then. And then, like you said, Lovett, it's apples and oranges in a year where we've never had this many people vote by mail. So it's good to see enthusiasm, but that's it.
It's also the opposite, right? There are counties where Trump won by 20 points, but there's a Democratic registration advantage because there are a lot of former Democrats who voted for Trump in 2016 and probably will again.
Yeah. Alex Medrano via Facebook. Is there any way we can get back into the Iran nuclear deal if Biden is elected? How long will it take for the U.S. to regain its reputation on the world stage after all the damage Trump has done in terms of foreign policy? World O.
I mean, the reputation question is going to be a generational problem, so good luck with that, Joe. Yeah, he can get right back in the Iran nuclear deal tomorrow, and then hopefully renegotiate a stronger follow-on agreement that extends it. I'm hoping that that's one of the first things that Biden does if he wins, because right now we should be clear that we are much less safe. Iran is enriching uranium at levels that they were forbidden from doing under the Iran nuclear deal. And on top of that, the Trump administration is putting more and more sanctions on them and just destroying their economy, destroying their ability to get in like medical supplies in the middle of a pandemic. It is really a bloodthirsty, vindictive, horrible policy that is being implemented on the Iranian regime. And I'm obviously no fan of the leadership in that country, but you have a bunch of people trying to live through a pandemic and they're just crushing them. And it is deeply fucked up.
All right, last question. Julie Finn Bakey via Facebook asks, at what point is it too late, not effective to donate to candidates? I'm thinking specifically of Senate candidates. Can my money still help Doug Jones or Gary Peters? Are donations useful right up to Election Day, or is there a cutoff beforehand where it becomes too late to place ads or send out mail?
You take that one.
Sure. I think, maybe not on election day, but I think in these last couple weeks, your money is very effective, right? Like campaigns place last minute buys all the time. They can go up on air really fast. There's also, in addition to advertising, that's not just where the money's all spent. There's also a field operation. There's ballot chase operations to make sure that you go find voters who haven't returned their ballot yet. Like there are so many things campaigns can spend money on towards the end. And if they are hurting for cash or they are being outraised or outspent by their opponent, then yes, that money helps. Your money tends to help most in close races and especially some of the down ballot races where it doesn't take a lot of money to suddenly have a cash advantage, right? Like that's why we've been raising money in our Fuck Gerrymandering Fund for a lot of state legislative races. We've been trying to do things like, on Thursday's pod, we told you about that poll in Doug Jones's race in Alabama. Doug Jones raised, how much was it, Tommy, over the weekend?
They didn't, that wasn't an external number.
Oh, sorry. So we tried to raise a bunch of money for Doug Jones's race over the last couple days. That's certainly
Can we
gonna help
keep in
Doug
that
Jones.
Tommy knows the internal number? Because I think it's cool.
Well, that, they reached out to us because they were looking for some help raising online. And I do think it speaks to John's broader point, which is like Doug Jones is someone who is in a really tight race in a really hard state. And they think that they have if they can get a little more money in to go up on air and do more in these closing weeks, that they might be able to win. So
yeah,
we'll see.
So maybe when it comes down to like the day before the election, maybe you don't donate. But up until then, keep donating because it could help a lot. If you haven't already, this is the week to make a plan to vote. Do not wait. If you can, take advantage of in-person early voting. If you'd like to vote by mail, get your ballot and then figure out exactly when and where you'll drop it off. There are plenty of options to vote early and safely. If you need any help at all, we've got you covered. Go to votesaveamerica.com/plan to make your plan, find your voting location, and vote as soon as possible. And if you've already made a plan or if you've already voted, your work isn't done. You got to go help at least 5 other people in your life make a plan to vote who don't already have one. That's what I'm asking you guys to do. Because I'm sure a lot of you are just like, I've already voted. Don't talk to me. There's other people that you know who have just sitting there on their ballots, Mm-hmm. Love it.
You know other people.
Yeah, okay. That's right.